Hello, my name is Ben Riley, and I'm conducting this interview for the purposes of an assignment for a cultural anthropology class I'm currently taking. I have the honor of interviewing my grandfather, Tom Riley, who is a writer, photographer, lecturer, and professor on the Orphan Train's writing, stamp collecting, and many other topics. Tom, thank you for joining me for this interview.
Thanks for inviting me, Ben.
It's a pleasure. So I think to begin, can you just describe what the Orphan Train Era was, how many people were involved, and any other relevant information you think we should know about?
Okay, the orphan trains began in 1853, and it was the largest mass relocation of children in American history. I happened upon a treasure trove of information at the Rockland County Historical Society. I was researching a book on an institution I grew up in, and I didn't find much material, but they said they had a lot of boxes in the hayloft. So I went up to the hayloft and found 26 boxes, not relating to the subject I was researching, but relating to some mass relocation of children. Contained the names of approximately 35,000 children.
My goodness.
And where they were sent and the years they were sent. And I put it all together and actually wrote 3 books on it. It was between 1853 and 1929, over 273,000 were shipped out of New York City by rail and sent all across America. Also in Philadelphia, Boston, and Chicago, they were transporting these orphan train riders. Some scholars estimate maybe 400 to 600,000 children rode the orphan trains.
Wow, that's quite a big number.
Yeah.
And can you explain sort of how that affected how we care for orphans today versus how we cared for orphans during the time of the Orphan Train Era?
Well, one of the earliest people to become interested in the orphans, by the way, those orphans were in the beginning the children of the Great Hunger in Ireland. Up to 15 to 20,000 were living in alleyways, sewer pipes, and subsisting on meager food and anything they could get. There was no social safety net, no welfare, nothing like that, food stamps, and they were just surviving on their wits. And the first people to take an interest in this was 32 women got an apartment in New York City and established the American Female Guardian Society. They felt the same need to help these orphan children in the beginning, especially young girls who were resorting to all kinds of things to just survive. So, but 6 months later, they took in the boys too. And they actually bought an old brewery and established a school, a church, a library, dormitory, and a place where men could take pledges against alcohol, since that was the main huge problem back then.
So it's got quite a history, and it sort of changed the way we see caring for the orphan. And were there any programs that developed out of that era?
Yes, there was. So fast forward 20 years later, from 1832, and in comes Charles Loring Brace, a minister from Connecticut, and he is horrified at what he sees, and he starts the Children's Aid Society along with Theodore Roosevelt Sr., who was a philanthropist at the time, and they started taking in these kids off the street. But there were so many of them that within a year he had to come up with some larger system of getting the kids, and he came up with getting them out of the city. So he came up with the idea of sending them to the farmers and who needed help in the great Midwest and throughout America. So he thought that they would be interested in taking these kids in as farmhands, as help, but also they would make a promise to care and in some cases adopt them.
And did the church play a role in the Orphan Train Era?
The church, the general, when you think about the Female Guardian Society, they were a Protestant organization. They were a temperance organization, and many people assumed that the temperance organization were hysterical saloon bashing women when these were the first women to care about these children. And they also sent a newsletter to every Protestant church across America, and in it they would tell them about the plight of these orphans. And people, for $1.50, they could have an orphan would come out to them by railroad, and they could take them in and choose to adopt them or just care for them until they were adults. Yeah.
And so, moving forward towards the present, how should the church why should the church understand the Orphan Train Era, and what is its historical significance to us today?
Well, the church, like I said, was early involved in the care of orphans and children, and today, more or less in America, the state has taken over that role. Although there are many church-related child care agencies, there are less so than they were in the past. And you find the church caring more for the international community. Most orphanages, it seems, are church-related in Africa or in Asia and things like that.
And obviously the concept of caring for the orphan is something that's a cornerstone of the Bible and the Christian faith. Like, for instance, Psalm 82 verse 3 states, defend the weak and the fatherless, uphold the cause of the poor and the oppressed. Looking at the situation for orphans today in the United States and abroad, do you have any suggestions for how the church should handle caring for orphans and bringing them to loving families and the issues surrounding that?
Well, I think they, should continue their support, and they do internationally, and there are some places like Boys Town and other institutions, child care institutions, that are run by the church. But here in America, it seems to be, but less so. But they still advocate for them, and I'm sure financially support efforts to help children.
So they've played a big role.
A very significant role, especially in the early years. In the 21st century, here in America, it seems that the state has been almost shamed into doing more, because it was the church that started it.
So the church sort of picked it up, the Protestant church, the Female Guardian Society, they started it, and then they brought
did
the
the first social work and made the state realize that it had an obligation to these young
Such an
children.
important part of the story, and it's something that a lot of people don't know. I didn't know it until I started researching for this interview, but it's a very important part of the story. And
the Orphan Train experience went on for 75 years, and out of it came one great story is a train went to Noblesville, Indiana, and a judge took in one boy who was only 12 years old, and he wanted to see what he could make of the kid. And the boy later went to Yale and graduated and became a lawyer, a missionary, and a businessman. And he went to Alaska to seek his fortune, and he was so bright that he became the three-term territorial governor of Alaska.
Wow.
Yeah. And another boy was taken in by a farmer, and he would work 7 days a week, and he ran away from the farm and joined the Civil War. And his name was Andrew Horace Burke, and I wrote a book about him called A Man for All Seasons. He was only 12 years old when he joined the Civil War as a drummer boy.
Oh my goodness!
Yes.
And he rose through the ranks.
Rose through the ranks.
What an inspiring
This
story.
is John Brady. This is his story, that he became the three-term.
That's incredible.
Territorial governor of Alaska.
So as we can see, the church had a transformative impact, and it's amazing how many lives were changed.
Yes.
For the better, and people.
That's right. It turned out that many people, objected to the trains, and
It's still very controversial.
Controversial, but it turned out that 75% of the kids turned out to be productive American citizens. They were taken in by good families and, you know, raised, and some adopted and taken in as their own children.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the others, though, there were other reports of, you know, cruelty and overwork and things like that.
Absolutely, yeah. It's
Yeah.
a complicated issue, but so moving along, what do you think will happen if as you mentioned, the state is sort of taking more control and the church is less involved here in America. What do you think will happen if that continues to occur and the state sort of takes most of the control and the church focuses mostly abroad? Do you think that will be any negative implications for orphans?
I see that more or less continuing. The state, you know, is very interested in raising healthy children, so they have the opportunity and the funds to give them psychological care and other extra care that some the children with assorted ailments and stuff need extra care. So I think more or less will continue like that for a while, with the church mainly concentrating on the abject poverty that exists in Africa and Syria and many other refugee centers throughout the world.
That's interesting. You know, when I compare the state's role and the church's role, a lot of times they provide similar services, but in some cases the church, you know, brings that extra element of being very Christ-centered and centered on caring for the poor and the needy and the oppressed, and so hopefully.
And what appears today is that many of the large institutions have disappeared. Like I think here in Rockland County, we used to have places like Happy Valley, Lakeside. They're no longer here because they found that children do better in small group homes. Yeah, and there's a big change there. That a lot of the large institutions like St. Agnes, St. Agatha's, which house hundreds of kids, thousands over the years, no longer exist. Yeah.
You know, that's interesting how how things have changed and
evolved
over the years, and it sort of brings me to my next point. So in the cultural anthropology class I'm taking, one of the most valuable things I've learned thus far is to try to see things from the perspective of those you're trying to help, as well as being the helper. And I think that's something that the church has overall done very well in the past, as we could see with the Orphan Train Era and their role in that. So what do you think, how do you think approaching this issue from that more anthropological perspective, how do you think that'll help the church in their future ministry?
Well, I think that the theory is now to keep the child closer to his family. So even though his family might be shattered, they have now welfare, food stamps, Social Security, disability, and the thinking now is to keep children closer to their families rather than send them hundreds or thousands of miles away. And I think that, again, that the church, you know, through its donations and everything, helps support a lot of these refugee centers and things like that. And that will continue into the future.
Absolutely. And what do you think the church can do today to help orphans?
Just to be, I think, supportive of any cause dealing with children, give them a good start in life, and help especially those who are refugees from so many war-torn countries.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, the church brings this valuable perspective of empathy and Christ-like love and care and acceptance. And I think that's really important for the church, communities in each church to band together and raise money, or, you know, even donate food, make meals. People who are lawyers or doctors can volunteer their care, and it really needs to be a community effort to make caring for orphans really possible and done well and appropriately. And I think we're going to close with that. Tom, thank you so much for joining me.
Well, thanks for inviting me, Ben.
It's been a
pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.